Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to dedicate these next couple of minutes of your lives to remember a great American hero, actually. We've been hearing about him a lot now. He's been trending on Twitter and all over the news. Barack Obama honored him and called his family everyone. You know who I'm talking about. I'm talking about Steve Jobs. And most of you think of him as the creator of Apple. He's become like synonymous with it because he and Steve Wozniak created it. But it was more than that. It was like his passion. That's why Steve Jobs and Apple are basically interchangeable now. And so, anyway, I was very sad when he died. And I made this speech. I actually had another topic planned, but I made this speech as a, there's a word for it, but as a tribute, that's right, to Steve Jobs. And so I'm going to start by telling you the story of his life. You see, he was born in 1955 in San Francisco, but there's little. He was actually adopted. His birth parents were Abdul Fattah Jandali and Joanne Schiebel. Jandali was a Syrian, and Schiebel was Jewish, German, I think. And her dad actually had a problem with his little daughter marrying a Syrian, so they couldn't get married. So, without telling anyone, she went to San Francisco and had the baby and gave him up for adoption. And he was adopted right there by Paul and Clara Jobs. And yeah, so he lived in San Francisco for the first couple of years of his life. And then they moved to San Jose, Cupertino, where, now Steve didn't like this at first because it's sort of like, it was like a less interesting town, I guess, but it put him at the right time and at the right place because that was where the emerging Silicon Valley movement was with computers and all that, and that's why he's such an icon today. So he was a young kid. He was having trouble through school mainly because he didn't really care. He was sort of like in that hippie generation where he wanted to sort of live fast and die young. He didn't actually expect himself to live past 45. He said that. He did live past 45, but not by a lot. And so when he was about 14, he met Steve Wozniak. And Steve Wozniak was sort of like a awkward, like didn't really have any friends, but he was sort of a nerd, but he was really good at computers and building them. And Steve didn't know it at the time, but this was his future business partner, and he was very important in the startup of Apple. So when he grew up a little bit, Steve went to Reed College in Oregon, but he dropped out after the very first semester because honestly he didn't know what he wanted to do with his life. So, and he said that college wasn't helping him find out what he wanted to do, so he quit. But he stuck around for another year or two, just dropping in random classes like calligraphy and stuff, which actually helped him later on. Like if you notice on Macs, the Apple key has a little squiggly thing. He designed that because he's into calligraphy and stuff. So he got a job at Atari after that, where he got just enough money to go on this spiritual trip to India. He thought he could find inner peace. And over there he became a Buddhist and did a lot of LSD. And when he came back, he was sort of different. And he founded Apple with Steve Wozniak. And they sold their computer, they made some money selling the Apple I. And it wasn't until a couple years after they had already been working at Apple that Steve had the inspiration that made him secure his place in the Hall of Fame of computers. He went to a Xerox conference and saw their graphical user interface, and he was the only one with the vision to really set up a market for a personal computer using this graphical interface, and that led to the Macintosh. which is, it doesn't really look much like the computers of today, but it was closer than this, you know. So the Macintosh was like amazing. Everyone was going crazy. It was sort of like the iPhone. How before the iPhone, smartphones were Blackberries, and those sucked. And Steve was so passionate about his work that he didn't have time to manage the company, Apple, so he hired another CEO, the CEO of Pepsi, this guy, and John Scully, that's his name. And yeah, they had some disagreements because Scully just didn't have the same vision as Steve. So then Steve Jobs got fired from Apple. But while he was gone, he's a pretty productive guy, he started two companies, namely Next Computers. And these were like really good computers, and he patented a lot of stuff while working at Next, which when Apple bought Next, it was sort of their inspiration for a lot of things that are in the Apple computers right now. And also Pixar, which was, it was an animation company, but they didn't make films until Steve Jobs bought them. They were just working for Industrial Light and Magic, which is a company under the Star Wars guys. He got hired back at Apple, and he brought with him this designer called Johnny Ive, and he's this great designer from England, and he's responsible for how well designed Apple products are today. So yeah, Apple was actually in almost bankrupt. They had to, because John Scully was such a bad CEO, and Steve Jobs really saved Apple with the invention of the iPod and iTunes. And you know, we still use iPods today, although not as much, because since then he's had a lot of like revolutionary new technologies, including the iPhone and the iPad. And unfortunately though, in 2003, Steve Jobs was diagnosed with cancer, pancreatic cancer. And so most, in case you guys didn't know this, most people with pancreatic cancer die like within like a really short time, within like months. Steve Jobs was really lucky that he lived as long as he did. So he worked really passionately his last few years, and he most likely left a bunch of stuff after his death, which he knew was inevitable. So the stuff we'll be seeing from Apple in the next few years will probably have Steve's DNA in it. If you guys are interested in Steve Jobs, I know I am. His book's coming out today. It's a biography, not written by him, of course, but it seems really interesting. I'm probably going to get it. That's him. He lost a lot of weight because he has cancer.